morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video, and in this one, we are going to be covering an 11.1 solo shuffle PvP tier list. This one is focusing in on the pre-season, so do note that likely things will change. This is the first week of the patch. The ranked season has not really started, but if you wanted to have an idea of where the meta currently is, assuming that no changes were to be made, then you're going to have a really good idea of that by the end of this video, and which specializations are likely going to be a good fit for yourself. So let's get started. I've listened to some feedback as well in the comments on my tier list videos, and I've organized this into melee first, range second, healers last, and then tanks finally at the end if you really want to know where the tanks are. Yeah, okay, let's get started. Arms Warrior, you guys are really good this patch, and that's mostly just because you got like 20% to 66% damage buffs on almost every single ability that you have. Demolish got buffed up to the levels that it was previously in earlier stages of Dragonflight, but it likely means that you are, signaling some alarms for nerfs. As it stands right now, though, defensively, you can still be quite fragile. And I do think that you can be kited quite heavily still. So I'm actually going to hold it down onto A tier from S tier. I want to reserve this for kind of just like, you're the triple threat. You have high burst, high sustain, high survivability. You're tanky. You're good in a lot of different instances. I'm going to try and reserve it for a little bit more options, but it's vastly stronger than it was previously. Fury Warrior, same deal. Just got damage buffs across the board, although you have lost a little bit of durability with the removal of Battle Trance on the PvP talents, similar to Arms Warrior. I think it's kind of the same thing. I'm going to put it onto A tier. I think the mobility with mages and with hunters, with how prevalent they likely are going to be, that I'm holding you a little bit back from going onto the S tier. Assassination Rogue. Don't think that you're the strongest rogue specialization at the moment. I think it's actually going to likely come as a bit of a surprise. I think you're easier to kill. You're easier to kite. Similar issues to Arms and Fury. You still have really solid damage overall, though. So Assassination, I'm putting it up under the A tier. Outlaw Rogue, I have not seen a tremendous amount of. I think it's mostly been Subtlety Rogue. Outlaw Rogue in the hands, again, Rogue specs in the hands of the best players can perform better than Warriors, but in the hands of average or mediocre players, you're probably going to perform better on a warrior than a rogue, just straight out of the box. So take that into account. I'm assuming you're playing at like the highest level of skill when I'm ranking these specializations. Outlaw Rogue still has really good control. I think its burst is not quite as good as Subtlety, and I really want to reserve that S tier spot for some very specific specs. So Outlaw Rogue, I'm going to put onto A tier for right now in solo shuffle. And Subtlety Rogue, I'm just immediately slapping up here. This guy does ridiculous amounts of damage. They can kill you in pretty much a half DR cheap shot. They have tons of escapes. I was worried about them going into this patch, but they ended up being in a phenomenal position. And currently right now in the preseason, it's all about burst damage. So if you're not a burst damage specialization, you're likely going to notice that you're significantly weaker, or you don't really feel like you can get a lot going before the game is just snap ended. And it's this type of damage that I think is likely going to get toned down, because it's definitely skewing the pacing to much faster than I think it's intended. Survival Hunter. This is a specialization that got reworked quite a lot, and I've seen it. I feel like it's getting still outshined by Beast Mastery, and it's still getting outshined by Marksmanship Hunter. So this is honestly a challenging one for me to rank, because I think it's got even more limitations as far as getting kited than these specializations. Its durability is probably within the same ballpark, if not a little bit less. And I haven't seen its burst damage be like startlingly high. So I'm going to give this a bit more of a reserved position here into the B tier for now. Definitely improvements. I think it's one of the specs that did benefit from the crowd control changes, where it doesn't break on damage, especially because you got wildfire bombs and tons of AoE. Definitely benefited in that regard, but I think its limitations on getting spam CC'd definitely hold it back in terms of overall power, and its burst isn't like excessive. I haven't seen somebody die in 1 millisecond to a survival hunter like I have a lot of other specializations. Ret Paladin, I really want to put this onto S tier. I'm not going to lie. I think that it's doing a ridiculous amount of damage. It's best suited in a burst meta. It has great defense to immune a lot of the one-shots. I'm doing it. I'm putting it onto S tier. I think it's a really strong specialization. Now, Enhanced with Shaman and Shaman in general, I think the changes to Primordial Wave have actually been a net negative. It hasn't actually worked out too well. Most of the enhanced shamans that I've seen kept playing Stormbringer, and it's still doing a remarkable amount of burst damage comparable to what it was in Season 1, so it can fit into that burst meta really well still. Survivability is a little bit lower, having lost Ancestral Guidance. So for me, for Enhancement Shaman, I think I'm gonna put you onto B tier as well. I think you got limited composition options, can be a little bit more difficult in Shuffle in that regard, because typically you want to like pair up with a Warrior or a Windwalker, and if you can't get like that ideal pairing, it can be a little bit more difficult, and I think you're a bit easier to kill. And you don't have the same type of control, right? Like these guys have a lot of control. These guys don't have as much control. I think losing Ancestral Guidance definitely hits you a little bit as far as healing output. I'm gonna leave you on B tier right now. Again, it still has like the one shot, but your one shot's also a much significantly longer cooldown, and you can't stun somebody at the same time that you're doing it. So I think it's fair to put it down here. And I want to have some delineation between the specializations, so it's not just a list where it's just everything's on A. Feral Druid, really good specialization. Definitely a bit worried about it dying to the type of damage that rogues, rets, and marksmanship hunters and the like can do at the moment. So for me, I think I'm going to put Feral Druid. This is a tough one. Because last patch it was like S tier the whole time almost, but it did end up falling off towards the end. It also did receive a lot of damage buffs to its abilities in this patch, which is still noticeable. I'm going to put it onto A tier for right now. I think it doesn't have the mobility limitations like these specializations or even some of these specializations. I'll probably put it at the top. So we'll reorganize this. So left to right means best to worst. And then, yeah, I think that's the best way to do it. Left to right is best to worst, and then up and down obviously is best to worst. Havoc Demon Hunter, really good specialization. Can get cranked by rogues though. So this is one of those weird things where it's like Demon Hunter is strong, but it's hard countered by rogue. So if you play into a rogue, it's going to be pretty tough. You do have tools that can kind of preemptively deal with it, but you might even die through things like pre-blur. I really want to put Demon Hunter onto S tier. I've seen it absolutely destroy people. But then we're getting a lot of spec. I'm going to put it maybe towards like the top end of A tier. I'll put it towards the top end of A tier. I think its weakness to rogue is definitely going to be a liability given how strong it looks at the moment. Frosty K, though, on the other hand, I am putting on S tier. It does a huge amount of damage during its Pillar of Frostgo with the new PvP talent, which gives you that giant Arthas ice circle as long as you have death grips, and you can stun targets, wait for their freedoms, and you can keep them nearby. It's almost like a guaranteed kill. It's really strong. Unholy Death Knight, I've seen a couple of players, dabbling around with it. I don't think it seems remarkable, and it doesn't really fit well in the burst meta. It's like the top classes up here are probably the highest available burst, and then it's like following down from there with limitations towards defense and mobility at the bottom of it, and then these having no control but with maybe a decent amount of burst. Unholy is probably, I've seen it do like okay. It's single target damage kind of lacking. I'm gonna put it here. I think it's not D tier, but I think you'll definitely notice it's a lot weaker in the current meta of pacing, where you need to be able to just crack out a ton of damage. Windwalker, this is going to be maybe a surprising ranking for some, but I'm actually going to put this onto S tier above Ret Paladin. Slicing Winds does great damage. It's a really fun ability. I hope that they find ways to incorporate spells like that from Plunderstorm into WoW in general, because it's a really fun ability. You can charge it up to dash faster or dash a longer distance. Does a remarkable amount of damage. Really satisfying ability to use. Now you've got Blade Storm with Celestial's hero talent tree, where you're immune to CC, so you got more crowd control avoidance on this patch. Damage output's in a really good spot. Already had really solid defense. It's a really good specialization. All right, so we got the melee. Affliction Warlock. This guy is tough because you do have Haunt Shadow Ball, but when I was playing it, man, you just get murdered by these melee DPS. It is really tough to survive. I think that it is likely still A tier, but it can be incredibly difficult to survive. You have to be really on your toes with the current damage output. Destruction Warlock, I think your damage fits better than Affliction, but you're even squishier, and you have to be more stationary more often. This is making it tough for me to rank Destro, because I do think if you chain a couple Chaos Bolts together, you can crack as hard as these classes, but the fact that you're stationary during that time makes it definitely a lot more limited, and your defense is pretty weak. So I'm going to put you down on B tier. Demonology Warlock, I don't see doing well in the current meta. Again, it's too much sustain-oriented damage. It takes too long to ramp compared to these guys that are just going to end the game before you probably even get to the Tyrant, at least in the current pacing. So definitely a lower ranking. Arcane Mage, this might come as a bit of a surprise. Do I want to do Mage first? I'm going to do it. I'm putting it on S tier. Overpowered Barrier, which I thought was not going to be a great talent given the current pacing of Season 1. ends up being really good in Season 2 because 99% of these specs can break your barrier in less than 1 second. And when they do, it reflects all the damage. And for Arcane, it puts you in invis and gives you a blink, so you become even more untouchable. And you have some of the highest available burst in the game right now, and you can avoid a lot of these melee. So when these melee are really strong, you can avoid a lot of them. And you can just blast them down. So Arcane is really good in that type of meta where shamans are falling off, and they definitely are. And these kind of more stationary melee with melee kicks end up getting kited really badly by you. Fire Mage, my personal experience on it was that it's really squishy and you just explode. But I have seen some Fire Mages that are obviously better than me playing it, and you're able to get quite a significant amount of damage off with it. So in the same, Overpower Barrier is the same thing for all of the specs, but I think Frost is just a little bit above. So I'm going to put Fire Mage here with Destro on B tier for Solo Shuffle, just because of its survivability relative to that of Arcane or Frost. And then when we look at Frost, I'm putting this up onto S tier as well. The main reason for that is that you just kite these melee so effectively, and you could still do a significant amount of your damage through instant casts, even despite the changes that came through for it. And it's basically just the same power level as it was in Season 1, and we saw that, you know, how popular it was at the end of Season 1. Boomkin, survivability randomly is somewhat better, and I don't understand how, because I don't think they posted any changes about it. Its damage can definitely fit in the current meta, but if you don't have the right type of healer to protect you from these melee, you will just fall over. So I think for me, I'm putting Boomkin here with Affliction. Your Incarn Burst can definitely fit and compete with this, but survivability, much more limited in that regard. Ellie Shaman, I think, has fallen a lot from grace, putting it down here on the C tier. The Primordial Wave change was a massive hit to it. When I was making predictions for the patch, I didn't know how badly it was going to get hit. But losing it's just basically dead now. That talent is dead. It doesn't really do anything. It's a little smidgen extra of AoE damage. It doesn't really matter. So it's you know, footing as like the highest burst spec is kind of lost now as a result of losing the Primordial Wave to the changes that have been made to it. So I think it's feeling noticeably weaker. It's possible that you could play Stormbringer, but then you're going to be having the problems Destro has, where you're going to be incredibly stationary. So I feel weird putting it down here below Destro and Fire Mage is the only thing. Because I'm going to leave it here for now. Beast Mastery Hunter, still remarkably strong specialization. Gonna put it up here onto A tier, probably maybe the best or in between the best. I think it's probably better than Boomkin, maybe better than Aflock. I'm gonna put it better than Aflock. It's still got really high damage output, even despite the recent nerfs on like the final patch before the release. And it has enough sustained damage that they're still able to compete even in the burst format, and it can just do all of its damage on the move and avoid a lot of the classes that are difficult at the moment. So I'm gonna put it onto A tier. Marksmanship Hunter, I kind of want to put it onto S tier, Giga S tier, but I'm going to put it onto S tier here. Double Tap returning back to the game. You guys remember when Double Tap was in, the reason it was removed the first time because it did incredible burst damage. It still does incredible burst damage. You get really big one-shots with it. Yeah, I think this is more than fair to put it up here. It's probably one of the best burst ranged at the moment in the game. You do have a little bit of trouble with maybe some multiple plate, but even then I don't see it being a huge issue. Devastation Evoker, I'm putting this as the best ranged. Devastation Evoker does insane damage at the moment. It's like Warrior. It got buff damage, more damage, more damage, more damage. Weaknesses, again, much like Demon Hunter, could be Rogue. Right, that's why I put Rogue as just like probably the best spec overall, because you're going to counter these specs, which are maybe like debatably really good right underneath you, but you counter them. And I've yet to see anything that kind of like directly counters you as a Subtlety Rogue. Aug Evoker, I don't know because I haven't seen it. I'm going to put it here just because I don't know, but it could be really good because it does have a one-shot, right? It had a one-shot last patch. It could be really good, but I've literally not seen it at all, so I'm just going to put it down here for now. Shadow Priest, not that great, honestly. It just doesn't have burst damage. And with the burst damage on these specs, and these specs being notoriously hard for you, like Windwalker and Warrior, I'm going to put you onto B tier. I think the instant CC is still nice. You are definitely have more survivability than these specs, but you don't have the burst to get up to this level. So the meta has kind of shifted around that. Discipline Priest, I think, is still... I'm going to do Discipline Priest later after we talk about the healers that I know for sure are S tier. So something like a Mistweaver Monk. The Crackle build is doing an incredible amount of healing. You still have good, decent damage output. Overall changes improved it by a lot. Being able to port while you're stunned and get away from these classes is definitely important. High mobility, really good. And you have a lot of powerful cooldowns to deal with burst damage. So definitely a strong healer. Really good option at the moment. Preservation Evoker, I think, is kind of mid. I think, again, you're kind of hard countered by Rogue. So Rogue and Arcane being really good, and this high burst damage with high mobility is like it's going to be tough for you to really get a lot of effective healing out. Holy Paladin is still really good. I'm going to put it onto A tier, but it could be even better than A tier. Even though you lost physical bop, you gained access to spell warning with the magic bop, so you can be more flexible for a little bit less specialized play into these melee, but you're still really good, especially in a burst meta. Paladin has just always been with how many cooldowns it has and how strong its cooldowns are. Restoration Shaman, my experience was not amazing. I felt like Earthshield being purged was really difficult. You would just immediately die. You could lose a game in almost any CC at all. So for me, I'm putting Resto Shaman kind of middle of the pack for my personal experience. I've seen some shamans who think that it's back. It's the craziest thing, but I think Monk is like, it's a lot better. So I don't know about that. So I'm gonna put Shaman kind of just at the mid level at the moment. Holy Priest, I haven't seen a lot of it. I've tried to follow Zenlin and his opinions of it, you know, because he's been the main Holy Priest for a long time now in PvP. The healers are really hard. I know for sure Mistweaver and Paladin are still really good, and I know Disc is good as well. Like, Disc could be S or A. I'll put it on S, A for now, and reserve this maybe just for Mistweaver for how much output it has currently. But it's still really good even with the loss of Rapture. Still just really good throughput. Resto Druid. The immune to CC tree form, some people complain about, saying it's terrible. Other people seem to like it. I've seen some people complain it still doesn't have a lot of damage output, is the problem. When I saw it, it can be tough to keep up with the damage. Like, your tree forms up, you're able to heal, it's gone, and then everything dies. So for me, I think Resto Druid, it's probably like more mid. Is it more mid or is it up here? Oh, my whole thing is gonna get bumped if I put it up there. Maybe I can't put it up there. I'm gonna put it on B tier. I need more data on the healers, so likely on my stream, which is linked in the description down below, I'll spend some time on Resto Druid to get more of a personalized feel for it. But from the druids that I've played with on my team in Shuffle and stuff like that, there are moments where it's like you can't keep up with the damage, and you've lost some immunities. You don't trank immunity anymore. So you can use Nature Swiftness though to activate the new tree form, because it's casted tree form. That's weird tech, but you can NS it, and it makes you immune to pretty much everything. So that's like your new Divine Shield, except you can't move. Whereas Paladin can move and do everything. You know, it can literally get on its Crusader mount and its bubble and do whatever it wants. You're stuck, rooted to the ground. Holy Priest. I don't know. I think you would be good. I feel like if you can play Ray of Hope, you have Angel immunity, much like a Holy Paladin. I would think that it's not that bad. I'm going to take a gamble with this one and ruin my whole thing here and have to reorganize my whole list by pulling it down. That's not going to help. Okay, wait a minute. All right, there we go. We fixed it. Fixed. Don't worry, guys. We're able to save it. The stream is saved. YouTube video is saved. I think Holy Priest is probably still good. I would say I'm the most skeptical of the healers. My main thought for these healers is that they don't have really good cooldowns to deal with burst damage, and they can kind of just die immediately. Prez is countered by Rogue. Druid can just kind of fall over. Shaman, anything dies in 1 CC. It feels like an Earthshield being purged is really frustrating. Whereas these healers felt a lot more consistent. I don't have a lot of data on Holy Priest, but I assume its cooldowns would do well in this meta. And then Monk does just feel like the strongest healer, especially in Shuffle. Brewmaster, I don't have enough information. Blood DK is probably still, I would think, like one of the best tanks. Guardian Druid is probably not that great. Prop Paladin still only fight other Prop Paladins, so there's no point. Prop Warrior was not as good as I expected. Not as good as I expected, but again, if you're, you know, it's probably still better than a lot of the other tank options. And I haven't seen any Vengeance. But having lost your unique stun to Havoc, it's probably not that great. So I'm going to toss it down here. But this is kind of just the overall feel after 2 days and observations, having played the game and having watched some streamers as well, rank 1 players. I think we're in a fast-paced, burst, stun, one-shot meta at the moment. And I think these classes are likely to kind of excel at that. As I could even maybe move Affliction down a little bit from this point. I think it actually can be really hard. And these are the healers that are, you know, perform with the highest throughput, or have cooldown kits that I think are more suited for this type of burst meta. And like I said, I think that things are likely going to change because it's really fast. The game is really fast now, having played it for 2 days. So other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed the discussion, and I will keep updating this tier list as things go on and relaying the news as always. So your support is appreciated, and I will see you in the next one.